Two men saved Britain from Nazi invasion. One was fired for it. The other was promoted for nearly losing it. And the decision that hung between them. The Big Wing. Maybe the most politically explosive tactical debate in the entire history of aerial warfare. What you are about to hear is not just a story about fighter pilots and dogfights. This is a story about ambition, betrayal, inflated claims, political conspiracy, and one of the greatest injustices ever committed against a military commander in the heat of war. And the terrifying truth is this. If the wrong side had won this argument a little earlier, Britain might not have survived. Stay with me, because this story goes deep, and every single layer of it will blow your mind. It is the summer of 1940. The skies over England are on fire. Germany has already swallowed France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway. The continent of Europe lies crushed under the boot of Adolf Hitler. Britain stands alone. The English Channel is the only thing between Hitler's war machine and total domination of the Western world. And Hitler has a plan. He calls it Operation Sea Lion, the amphibious invasion of Britain. But first, he needs to destroy the Royal Air Force. Because without air superiority, his invasion barges would be blown to pieces before they ever reached the beaches. So Hermann Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe, makes a promise to his Führer. He promises to annihilate the RAF in 4 weeks. 4 weeks. That is all he needs. And for a man commanding the most powerful air force the world had ever seen at that point, fresh from victories across Europe, with over 2,000 aircraft at his disposal, that promise did not sound unreasonable. Except for one thing. One man. And the system he had quietly, stubbornly, obsessively built over 4 years. His name was Hugh Caswall Tremenhere Dowding, and his pilots called him Stuffy. Now before we go any further, you need to understand what Dowding had built, because without understanding this, the entire controversy we are about to explore makes no sense. Dowding was not a charismatic general. He was not a showman. He was not the kind of man who gave speeches that made young pilots weep with patriotic fervor. He was methodical, precise, deeply serious, and almost maddeningly focused on one thing: building an air defense system that worked. And he had done it. By 1940, Dowding had created what historians would later call the Dowding system, and it was nothing short of revolutionary. It was the world's first fully integrated air defense network. Chain-home radar stations stretched along the south and east coasts of England, detecting incoming German aircraft while they were still over the channel. Reports fed into a filter room at Bentley Priory, Dowding's headquarters. From there, information moved through a hierarchy of operations rooms, group level, then sector level, and fighter squadrons were scrambled with extraordinary precision, guided by radio directly to the enemy. The average interception rate achieved by this system during the Battle of Britain was around 90%. Before the war, 30 to 50% had been considered effective. 90%. Think about what that means. For every 10 German formations that crossed the coast, 9 of them were met by British fighters waiting for them. Not scrambling blindly. Not searching. Waiting. And Dowding's core philosophy flowed directly from this system. His approach was to conserve resources, respond precisely, and never commit more aircraft than necessary to any single engagement. Because he understood something that his critics did not, or would not, accept. Britain did not need to destroy the Luftwaffe. Britain only needed to survive. If the RAF could not be wiped out, Hitler could not invade. And if Hitler could not invade before autumn, the Channel weather would shut down any invasion attempt until the following year. Time was the weapon. Preservation of fighter command was the strategy. And to execute that strategy, Dowding had organized his command into groups. Number 11 Group, covering southeast England and London, was the front line. It bore the overwhelming majority of the fighting. And its commander was a man who would prove to be one of the most gifted operational air commanders of the entire war. His name was Keith Park, a tall New Zealander with an ice-cool temperament and an extraordinary instinct for battle. Park's approach mirrored Dowding's philosophy perfectly. He sent fighters up in small, flexible formations, pairs of squadrons, sometimes just individual squadrons, to intercept raids quickly, disrupt enemy bombing runs, and get back down before losses became catastrophic. Park's mantra, repeated again and again, was that it was better to upset the aim of many than to destroy a few. He was not trying to slaughter the Luftwaffe. He was trying to make their bombing inaccurate. He was trying to protect his airfields, his radar stations, his pilots. He was trying to survive. To the north sat No. 12 Group, commanded by Air Vice Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory. 12 Group's primary role was to defend the industrial Midlands and the north of England, and, critically, to protect 11 Group's airfields when Park's squadrons were airborne and engaged. And this is where the first crack appears. Because 12 Group was not getting the glory, Leigh-Mallory's pilots spent most of the Battle of Britain doing convoy patrols, training flights, and waiting for calls from 11 Group that seemed to come too late, or not at all. And for the pilots of 12 Group, men burning with the desire to fight for their country, this was agony. And for Leigh-Mallory, watching 11 Group and Keith Park accumulate all the recognition, all the headlines, all the credit, this was something else entirely. This was personal. Now, enter Douglas Bader. If the Big Wing controversy has a single flashpoint, a single human catalyst around whom everything ignites, it is Squadron Leader Douglas Bader, commanding 242 Squadron out of Duxford in 12 Group. Bader was already a legend before the war even began. He had lost both his legs in a pre-war aerobatic crash, defied every medical board in the RAF, and fought his way back into the cockpit. He was fearless, magnetic, brilliant in the air, and absolutely intolerant of anything he perceived as passivity. For Bader, sitting at Duxford while 11 Group's pilots fought and died over Kent was simply unbearable. And he had an idea. Why send up one squadron at a time when you could send up 5? Why pick at the edges of a German formation when you could meet them with a wall of fighters so massive it would devastate the enemy before it even reached its target? Bader called it the Duxford Wing. Later, it would become the Big Wing, and Leigh-Mallory loved it. The logic of the Big Wing was seductive, simple, on the surface, almost undeniable. If one squadron could shoot down 10 enemy aircraft, 5 squadrons flying together should shoot down 50. Mass produces results. Concentration of force, the oldest principle in military strategy. Bader argued with burning conviction that if only 12 Group were unleashed, if only Park would call for reinforcements earlier, if only Dowding would sanction the use of large formations, the Luftwaffe could be met with an overwhelming force that would tear their formations to pieces and send them screaming back across the Channel. And in the autumn of 1940, as the battle raged and claims began coming in, the numbers seemed to support Bader. 12 Group's Big Wing was reporting extraordinary kill counts. Staggering numbers. One famous engagement on the 15th of September, what would later become celebrated as Battle of Britain Day, saw the Big Wing wade into the fighting over London, and the kill claims that came back were astonishing. Far higher than the claims from 11 Group's smaller formations. The Big Wing, it seemed, was the answer. Except it wasn't. And the reasons why it wasn't go to the very heart of the tactical reality of the battle. And they also reveal something deeply uncomfortable about human nature, ambition, and the way institutions can be corrupted even in the middle of a fight for national survival. Let's dismantle this claim by claim. The kill claims made by the Big Wing were wildly exaggerated. Not through deliberate dishonesty necessarily, though some historians have argued that point, but through the inherent chaos of large-scale aerial combat. When 5 squadrons of British fighters are all engaging the same German formation simultaneously, multiple pilots claim the same aircraft. There is no ground truth in a dogfight at 30,000 feet. You see a Heinkel spiral and smoke, and you claim it destroyed. The pilot in the squadron beside you sees the same Heinkel and claims it too. Post-war analysis of German records showed that the actual losses inflicted by the Big Wing were dramatically lower than claimed. The numbers that so impressed the Air Ministry and the politicians were largely a fiction of combat accounting. But there is a deeper problem, a more fundamental, tactically devastating problem, and it comes down to time. Keith Park and Hugh Dowding understood something that Lee Mallory and Bader refused to accept, or could not emotionally accept given the fury of their desire to act. Assembling a big wing takes time. Bader's 5 squadrons needed to climb, to form up, to get into tactical formation. We are talking 20 to 30 minutes minimum before the big wing was ready to engage. And in 1940, with German bombers crossing the channel from bases in France and the Low Countries, 20 to 30 minutes was often the entire warning time available. By the time the big wing was formed up and climbing, German bombs were already falling. Park's small formations scrambled immediately on radar warning, intercepted the enemy over the coast, over the sea, over Kent, before London. The big wing, even when it did arrive, was often arriving after the bombs had dropped, chasing the enemy as they turned for home. This is not theory. This is what the records show. And Park had made exactly this argument. You cannot defend London by assembling your force while the enemy is already over London. There is another dimension to this problem that makes it even more damaging. Park's 11 group airfields were being attacked. The Luftwaffe was hitting the very sector stations and fighter bases that kept the Dowding system functioning. Every airfield hit, every operations room damaged, every radar station knocked out degraded the system that gave Britain its 90% interception rate. Park needed 12 Group to cover his airfields while his squadrons were airborne. And 12 Group failed to do this. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. There were multiple instances where 11 Group requested reinforcement from Lee Mallory's squadrons, and those squadrons arrived too late, or in some cases, did not arrive at all. While Lee Mallory was assembling his big wing for a grand dramatic engagement over London, Park's airfields were being bombed. The very infrastructure of British air defense was being degraded, and the historical record makes it clear that this failure was a serious problem. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a threat to the entire system that was keeping Britain alive. Now here is where the story takes a turn that is almost too extraordinary to believe. Because what happened next was not an honest tactical debate resolved by operational evidence. What happened next was a political coup d'etat inside the RAF. Lee Mallory was not just a field commander arguing for a different tactic. He was a political operator. And he had allies, powerful ones. William Sholto Douglas, the Assistant Chief of Air Staff, was a big-wing advocate who harbored considerable ambition of his own. Douglas Bader's adjutant was a member of Parliament who took the case directly to Winston Churchill. Senior politicians were talking face-to-face with a squadron leader, bypassing the entire chain of command. Lee Mallory had already ranted, following a reprimand from Dowding, that he would, and these are the recorded words, move heaven and earth to get Dowding sacked from his job. And he had already told Bader privately that Bader could ignore orders from 11 Group, and even from Fighter Command itself. This is a subordinate commander instructing one of his squadron leaders to ignore the orders of the commander-in-chief. In wartime, in the middle of the Battle of Britain, the crucial moment came on the 17th of October, 1940. A meeting was convened at the Air Ministry. On the surface, it was presented as a tactical review. In reality, it was, as historical analysis has consistently shown, an attack. Park was invited but found himself immediately on the defensive, constantly having to justify decisions he had made during a battle that Britain had just won. Lee Mallory was there. Bader was there, a squadron leader, present at a meeting of group commanders and Air Ministry officials, arguing against his superior's superior. Dowding, fatally, did not defend Park as strongly as he might have, whether from exhaustion, and there is credible evidence that the strain of the battle had pushed Dowding to near breaking point, that he spoke to the ghosts of his dead pilots, that his mind bore wounds invisible to those around him, or from some failure of political instinct. Dowding allowed the assault on Park to proceed without the defense Park deserved. And the minutes of the meeting clearly recorded that Park was treated as a man who had to justify failure, not victory. Failure. Britain had just survived the greatest aerial assault in history, and the man most responsible for that survival was being made to defend himself against accusations of tactical incompetence. The outcome was swift and brutal. On the 25th of November, 1940, Hugh Dowding was removed from command of Fighter Command. He was fired by telephone and given 24 hours to vacate his office. The man who had built the system that saved Britain was dismissed like a junior clerk. 1 month later, Keith Park was removed from command of 11 Group and sent to Training Command, the RAF equivalent of a professional death sentence. Lee Mallory took command of 11 Group. William Sholto Douglas took Dowding's place at Fighter Command. The architects of victory had been removed. The men who had argued for a different tactic, a tactic that the battle's own evidence had not vindicated, were elevated. It was one of the most breathtaking institutional betrayals in military history. And what happened next only makes the injustice more searingly obvious. Because the big wing got its chance. Sholto Douglas and Lee Mallory now ran RAF Fighter Command. And in 1941, they launched what they called the circus operations, offensive sweeps in large wing formations over German-occupied France. They were going to take the fight to the enemy. Big wings, aggressive forward operations, mass formations. Everything the critics of Dowding and Park had demanded. And the Luftwaffe, now defending, with short warning times and interior lines, in the exact tactical position that the Luftwaffe had held over Britain in 1940, did to the RAF big wings precisely what Dowding and Park had done to German formations. They waited, intercepted, and destroyed them with devastating efficiency. The kill ratios were catastrophic. In some engagements, the Luftwaffe was achieving kill ratios above 4-1 in their favor. Fighter Command was bleeding. The glorious big wing was being slaughtered over France by the very same logic that Dowding and Park had used against the Luftwaffe: controlled interception, preserved resources, tactical patience. The irony is so complete, it almost seems like historical fiction. But it isn't. Now let us step back and ask the question fairly. Was the big wing concept entirely without merit? Because history is rarely so clean as pure right and pure wrong. And to be honest with you, the answer requires some nuance. The big wing concept was not inherently insane. There are scenarios where massed formations make sense, if you have sufficient time to assemble them, if your warning time is long enough, if you are on the offensive, if you are not protecting airfields that are currently being bombed. In the post-1940 environment, when the RAF transitioned to offensive operations, larger wing formations had some utility, though the 1941 experience suggests even then the costs were catastrophic. And there were serious RAF thinkers who believed the two approaches could complement each other, that small formations for immediate interception and larger formations for follow-up could theoretically coexist. Even Keith Park himself, by late 1940, had suggested that a big wing could be based at one of 11 group stations as a backup, acknowledging that the concept had some potential role. But that is a very different thing from saying the big wing should have been the primary defensive tactic during the Battle of Britain. And it is a galaxy's distant position from the claim that Dowding and Park were wrong and should have been fired. The verdict of serious military historians has become increasingly clear and increasingly damning toward the big wing faction. The Royal Air Force's own institutional failure to honestly assess the tactical evidence during the battle, to weigh inflated kill claims against operational reality, allowed a politically motivated internal campaign to destroy the careers of the men who actually saved Britain. The kill claims that drove the political argument for the big wing were later found to be significantly overstated. The German records tell a very different story than the triumphant reports coming out of Duxford. And the structural argument, That assembly time made the big wing unsuitable for the defensive battle being fought in the summer and autumn of 1940 has been confirmed by virtually every major operational analysis conducted in the 80 years since. What about Lee Mallory himself? History's judgment of him is complicated by several factors. He died in August 1944 when his aircraft crashed into a mountain in the French Alps while he was on his way to take command of air forces in Southeast Asia. He was, at that point, an Air Chief Marshal, the highest-ranking British officer killed in the Second World War. He left no memoir, no final accounting of his role in the controversy. Some historians have argued that he has been made a scapegoat, that the blame for what happened to Dowding and Park belonged primarily to Sholto Douglas and the Air Ministry establishment, and that Lee Mallory was used as much as he was using. This is not an entirely unreasonable view. The Air Ministry had its own institutional reasons for wanting Dowding gone, reasons that had nothing to do with the big wing. Dowding had spent years clashing with the Air Ministry, refusing to send his fighters to France during the Fall of France campaign, resisting political pressure, making enemies at every level of the RAF hierarchy. There were powerful men who wanted him removed long before the big wing controversy provided the pretext. But the question of Lee Mallory's personal conduct during the battle is harder to rehabilitate. His failure to adequately support 11 groups' airfields. His encouragement of Bader's insubordination. His recorded statement about moving heaven and earth to destroy Dowding's career. His willingness to allow a junior officer to bypass the chain of command to lobby politicians. These are not the actions of a man whose conduct was above reproach, whatever the final distribution of institutional blame might be. And then there is Douglas Bader. Brilliant pilot, national hero, extraordinary human being who overcame obstacles that would have broken almost anyone. But in this controversy, a man whose passion for action, whose hatred of inactivity, whose almost physical need to be in the fight, led him into territory that a more reflective officer might not have entered. Bader was used, as one historian put it, by men with axes to grind and personal ambitions to further. His celebrity made him useful. His access to politicians made him dangerous to the chain of command. And his combat claims, made in the heat and chaos of aerial battle, provided the statistical ammunition for an argument that did not hold up under scrutiny. None of this diminishes his courage or his service, but it is part of the honest accounting of what happened in the autumn of 1940. Now let us talk about what this controversy cost. Not just in terms of careers destroyed, though those costs were real and unjust. Let's talk about what it could have cost. Because the historians who have looked most carefully at the Battle of Britain, men like Stephen Bungay, John Ray, Len Dayton, have made a chilling observation. In August and September 1940, when the Luftwaffe shifted its attacks from British cities to RAF airfields, targeting the very sector stations and radar networks that made the Dowding system work, the British were in serious trouble. Airfields were being cratered. Operations rooms were being bombed. The system was under genuine strain. And the failure of 12 Group to adequately protect those airfields, while assembling and positioning its big wing for dramatic large-scale engagements, was a contributing factor to that strain. Had Hitler not been goaded by an RAF bombing raid on Berlin into redirecting the Luftwaffe from airfield attacks to bombing London, giving the RAF a crucial breathing space, the question of which tactic was superior might have had a very different answer. Not because the big wing would have saved things, but because the failure of coordination that the big wing debate reflected might have pushed the Dowding system past the breaking point. Britain's survival was closer to the edge than most people realize, and internal tactical feuding and institutional incoherence made that edge sharper. Here is something that almost never gets the attention it deserves. Hugh Dowding's mental state during the battle. The records suggest that the pressure of command, of making daily life and death decisions about a battle on which the entire free world depended, was breaking him. There are credible accounts that Dowding, in the depth of his exhaustion, spoke to the ghosts of his dead pilots. That grief, kept carefully hidden from the world, was eroding the man from within even as he continued to function with extraordinary effectiveness in his professional role. The author David Fisher wrote of Dowding as a man whose mind broke from the strain at the height of the battle, but who nevertheless kept another part of his mind clear enough to continue making the decisions that saved England. That image of a man conducting the greatest air battle in history while quietly coming apart inside should make us look at what was done to him with something more than historical analysis. It should make us feel the weight of it, because this was a man who had given everything, who had sacrificed his health, his peace of mind, his emotional equilibrium in service of his country. And his country's reward was a telephone call firing him in 24 hours to clear his desk. The historical rehabilitation of Dowding and Park took decades. It was slow, driven by serious scholarship rather than official acknowledgement. Keith Park went on to command the air defense of Malta in 1942, where, surprise, surprise, he used exactly the same tactical principles he had used in the Battle of Britain and produced exactly the same result, successfully defending Malta against overwhelming Axis air power and preserving it as a critical Allied base in the Mediterranean. His vindication through results was complete and undeniable. Dowding spent the rest of the war in peripheral roles, retired in 1942, and then, astonishingly, devoted much of his later life to spiritualism and animal rights advocacy. The intensity of his character finding new channels after the great work of his life was done. He was made a peer, becoming Lord Dowding of Bentley Priory. He died in 1970. A statue of him stands today outside St. Clement Danes, the RAF's church on the Strand in London. His ashes lie at Westminster Abbey. History, at last, has given him something approaching what he deserves. But the controversy itself has never fully closed. Even today, aviation historians and military analysts debate whether there was any version of the big wing concept that could have worked within the constraints of the 1940 battle. Whether better coordination between 11 and 12 groups might have produced a hybrid approach that got the best of both tactics. Whether the fundamental problem was not the tactics themselves, but the catastrophic failure of RAF command structure to resolve the dispute internally instead of allowing it to become a political weapon. These are legitimate questions. Military history is not mathematics. There are rarely clean, definitive answers. And the fog of an active battle makes tactical judgments from the outside easier than they were for the men who had to make them in real time, with incomplete information under fire. What is not legitimate debate is the question of whether Dowding and Park were treated fairly. They were not. What is not legitimate debate is the question of whether the institutional process by which they were removed served the interests of truth, evidence, or military effectiveness. It did not. A tactical controversy that should have been resolved through honest operational analysis was instead weaponized by personal ambition and political maneuvering to destroy the careers of the men who had just achieved one of the most decisive defensive victories in the history of air warfare. And the cruel final twist, that the big wing tactics subsequently adopted by their successors failed spectacularly in offensive operations the following year, only sharpens the historical judgment. This story matters beyond the history of 1940. It matters because it tells us something fundamental about institutions under stress, about the way personal ambition can corrupt professional judgment, about the way inflated statistics can create false narratives that drive real decisions with real consequences, about the way political influence can override operational evidence, about what happens when the people who are winning are too busy winning to protect themselves from those who want to take credit for the win, about loyalty and the devastating human cost of its absence. Stuffy Dowding, the man who was too serious for speeches, too methodical for popularity, too honest for politics, and too effective for his rivals to forgive. He built the system that saved the world from Hitler's invasion plan. He sat in his headquarters at Bentley Priory and moved his fighters like chess pieces on a board, patient and precise, while the world above his head screamed with fire and death. He won, and then they fired him. That is the big wing controversy. And the more you understand it, the more you understand that the Battle of Britain was not just fought in the skies over England. It was also fought in meeting rooms and corridors and the offices of air marshals who should have known better. 2 battles. Only one of them deserved to be won by the side that won it. So the next time someone tells you that history is just about the battles and the weapons and the tactics, remember this story. Remember that the greatest threat to Hugh Dowding during the Battle of Britain was not Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe. It was the men in uniform on his own side, in his own command, who wanted what he had built and could not stand that he had built it better than they ever could. Remember the few. Remember what they flew into. And remember the man who put them there and what it cost him. Because history owes Hugh Dowding an honest accounting. And now, so do you.